calculated that correctly, give or take a week. And I'm just joking with myself, thinking it should be called COVID-15, right? For all the 15 extra pounds we've all gained during COVID, right? Anyway, this is series number 2 for the attorneys Claire Wyant and Larry Cortez to give a board certification. And I believe they want to do 1 per month going out through the end of this year. So for the board members that are on, if you have fellow board members that have missed out, they are extending it at the state of Florida because of COVID, and we still have time to get everybody certified. We do have 3 sponsors today. The 3 sponsors are PuraClean, Vinteum Software, and GRS Community Management. So with that said, I'm going to introduce the owner of PuraClean, who is also my new boss, Daniel Castro. Daniel, want to say a few words about the company?
Hi, Peggy. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, guys. I just want to do a small, a brief introduction about PuraClean. We are in the restoration industry. PuraClean is one of the, I would say, one of the big players in the restoration industry in the United States. It's about more than 300 offices located in the 48 states. And we are dedicated to help families and businesses to recover after water damage, fire damage, more remediation, and biohazard cleanups. We serve residential and commercial as well. PuraClean is a Florida-based company. Was founded about 25 years ago in Broward County. Right now, we have about 25 offices in the state of Florida and about 290 offices in the United States. So what we do is we offer water damage services for buildings, water damage services for water damage recovery services, for all kind of
okay, great.
commercial
Welcome.
and residential.
Condominiums,
commercial
high-rise
condominiums,
buildings.
correct. Condominiums, any kind of buildings, commercial real estate. And we are here to offer you any kind of services if you in any moment you believe it's a good opportunity to serve you. Our idea is try to offer services to our potential customers, and not commitment up front. We want to sometimes to provide some guidance. Sometimes the customer, they don't have a big loss, or they don't have a loss per se, and they are afraid to call the insurance company to open the claim, or they are afraid to understand what is the right approach to fix the problem. So we can provide that kind of guidance in order to try to minimize sometimes the claims with the insurance company. We can provide the free estimate, the free consultation, if we can do it, and try to provide under the budget or under the claim deductible, all the guidance that we are possible to offer to the customers. So pretty much what we offer is the water damage services, fire damage, mold remediation, biohazard cleanups, and per customer request, we can offer also the reconstruction as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to call me directly, or you can call the office. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Darrow. And I want to say thank you, Jonathan. I want to say to everyone that these courses can't be put together without a team, group working together. Jonathan does quite a bit of work behind the scenes, preparing the original invites, and I'm doing the e-blasting, but then Jonathan comes around in the end, and thank you so much, and getting us all organized. So with that, I'll turn you over. You can say a little bit about Vinteum software.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much, Peggy. Yeah, it's not easy putting these together, but you know, it is awesome to see how many people benefit. And then, you know, we get a lot of emails afterwards, folks that enjoyed the courses. So it's really great to hear some feedback there. So with Vinteum, we build HOA and condo websites and communication software. So with that, I've got a couple quick questions, and this is kind of a new feature for me, so I'm looking forward to using it. But I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll, and I'd love if everybody could go ahead and respond when they can. Ultimately, it's just 3 questions. Looking to know a little bit about your current software situation, if you have any, if you've got a website, that sort of thing. In addition, if you kind of manage communication by way of like email or door knocking or mailed letters, posted notices, that sort of stuff. And lastly, how you're holding your board meetings. I know that this crazy world that we're living in might be limiting the in-person options. A lot of people are also mentioning doing video conferencing such as Zoom or Teams, but just kind of looking to see what everybody's working with there. But ultimately, going back to Vinteum, so what we do is, we offer a public-facing website. It's great for highlighting what makes your community unique, and then on that back end, how to communicate with residents, right? So if you're a board, you could send a message to not only one building, but all of the buildings. You could also create different groups. So for example, if you wanted to reach out to all of those that are involved in the running club or the landscaping committee, that sort of stuff, we could help you out there. One thing that's become extremely relevant in this post-COVID world is also amenity reservations. There's kind of a lot of limitations there. We can't have too many people using the tennis courts at any given time, or in the pool or the gym, that sort of stuff. So we've been helping a lot of folks there. And if there is any interest, feel free to reach out. Again, my name is Jonathan, and I'm with Vinteum Software. So thanks for getting a lot of votes coming in. Looks like a lot of people are using that video conferencing to hold their board meetings. And it seems like, one of the primary methods for communication is email, also mailed letters. I'm sure that these are some things that also, Larry and Claire will jump into as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, so thank you for responding. And that's all for me. One last quick thing, Raquel, if you're still having some issues, go ahead and just shoot me a quick message in the chat, and we'll try to work through those as well. But thanks, everybody.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jonathan. Great software product you have there, and very helpful to condominiums and homeowners associations. And as you all know, if you have 150 condominiums or more, you're required to have an autonomous software product for your website. So Jonathan's product, if you don't know, go on the website, call Jonathan, has every feature, has concierge products on it, and so on. So with that, I can see that GRS has not made it here, and we're going to continue, but I will do a light introduction for those of you who do not know GRS Community Management. They've been around 30 years. They have about 250 communities, 70 managers deep, which means they have a lot of play in support, and they also have an excellent finance team, which has a CPA for a finance director, and they have a couple levels of management, from VP of operations, regional directors, and then the property managers themselves that actually come either on site or do portfolio management. So if you have any questions regarding GRS Community Management, feel free to shoot me an email as well. I left on very good terms, and now I'm with PuraClean. And with this, I'm going to turn this over to our star speakers today, which are Claire and Larry. So you can introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Claire Wyant-Cortez, and sitting beside me is Larry Cortez. Sorry that I'm quite short and Larry isn't so much. So we have a little different level here going on. He's got to think he's got to shrink his chair. So thank you for attending today's seminar. We hope that you will find it informative. A little bit about myself. I have been practicing law. This will be my 24th year. I do things other than condominium and homeowners associations, but that is one of the staples that I do. And I am board certified in that specialty. So I'll let Larry say hello and introduce himself.
Hello, I'm a little shorter now. My name again is Larry Cortez, and I've been practicing for about 10 years, primarily in condominium and HOA law. I do a little bit of real estate sales and transactions, but my primary focus is on communities, helping communities through your boards and helping and working with your property managers. And so we're happy to have this opportunity. I do want to mention, you know, it kind of dovetails with a little bit of what we're talking about with the Vinteum software. It is very important to kind of step forward, get kind of out of those paper noticing sort of situations, get out of those paper records situations. Once you get into a you know, a piece of software like that that helps manage your community, it's invaluable and you'll never want to go back. So so he was absolutely correct. It's definitely a big help in your job, our job, and your manager's job. And with that, I'll turn it back to Claire.
Oh, great. So for the kind of housekeeping and boring stuff up front, I just want to say that the presentation that we're providing to you today, it is not intended to be, nor is it legal advice. Each association will have its own attorneys. Maybe we represent you, maybe we don't, maybe we will in the future, who knows. Happy to take those type of inquiries separately, but today is for the board certification so that each of you can obtain the certification, or perhaps just refresh yourselves on what it is to be a board member within a community association. Because it's combination between condominium and homeowners associations, and they're not the same in everything, we're going to touch on 3 areas that we think overlap for both of them, which is the your responsibilities, so the board's powers and duties. We're going to touch on the operational aspects, and we're going to touch on official records. But we're going to do this pretty generalized for a specific purpose, because we want to allow enough time in the end so that we can take questions from you. And again, it's not meant to be legal advice, so we can't really answer specific questions to your particular community, because those are all many times, and often not, is going to be pretty document specific. So that's not the type of questions that we can answer. You can certainly ask whatever question you would like to when we have that question and answer session, part of it today, but you'll have to respect the fact that we may not be able to specifically answer a particularly targeted question. So with that, do you have any more housekeeping things to do?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, great. So then we're going to delve right into it. So first of all, first and foremost, as a board member, you are in a fiduciary relationship. You're sitting there. When you're sitting there at the table, or nowadays maybe behind your computer on a Zoom or Microsoft Teams kind of meeting, I think Zoom is going to become like the Xerox, right? Even if it's a different type of branding, everybody's gonna say Zoom. And today we are on Zoom. So anyway, as you're sitting there as the board member, remember you have your fiduciary duty hat on. Yes, typically you will own a unit within that community. There are a few communities that don't require you to be a unit owner to be a board member, but that is rare. So you are a member within that community, but when you're acting as a board member, you're acting in your fiduciary capacity. So you have to act in the best interest of your community, not for yourself, because certain things may actually be a detriment to your own personal situation, but you can't let that personal issue interact with your fiduciary role within the community. That's very important to understand. So you kind of like if you have personal issues, and when you go to work and you got to leave your personal issues at the door, you need to leave your personal issues at the door when you're sitting at the table as a board member. You want to add on to that?
Well, I just a little bit from personal experience. The building that we're sitting in is an office condominium, and I sit on the board of that office condominium, and so I have various responsibilities to the condominium unit that we use for our office as a lawyer. But when I walk into those condominium board meetings, I kind of have to shed all that. It's good for background noise to understand, the context of what I'm doing. But if we need to spend money and it's for the benefit of all the members, it's going to come out of our pocket. But I still have to make a decision and make that decision not based on, do I want to pay this special assessment, or do I want to spend money on this thing that the association probably needs? I can't worry about what comes out of our pocket. I have to worry about what's best for the community. And that's very similar, the same sort of conflict, if you will, that you're going to have throughout your board membership. Every decision you make directly impacts you, but it also impacts your neighbors and your community members. So it's always important. You have to put those folks first. And if you can't, that's okay. But probably, and maybe this isn't the thing we would say in a seminar, but if you can't put those issues first, then directorship may not be good for you. And everybody has a role in the community. But that's how important it is that you really have to decide, can you put the community above yourself when you're wearing that hat? And if you can, great. And if not, maybe find a different role to help out with. Claire?
Yeah, okay. That sounds good. What else do you want to talk about? Powers and duties.
Well, the power thing is sometimes really easy. We can touch on that a second because, we always want to say everything's within our power. The duties are the tougher part. Because powers can be relatively easy to exercise. You can make decisions and you can boss folks around and you can say, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. The duties are important, and that they're really grounded again in that fiduciary relationship. But your duties, really, they require you to take some particularly special care beyond the conflict I mentioned. But it's also important that you look at things, for lack of a better term, very carefully. So for instance, if there's, fascia that needs to be painted, you need a handyman to come around the community and fix up things that might need painting or need shoring up, or maybe some rust needs to be treated and stuff. They seem like really minor things. But sometimes it's those minor, small dollar contracts that can get you in some of the biggest trouble. And so you want to take a step back, and it's easy to just say, well, so-and-so knows somebody who can come in and do this and they'll do it cheap. No, we don't need a contract. We don't need an agreement. We don't need anything like that. And it would be easy to exercise that power and say that. Unfortunately, you do need to do a little bit more. Now, do you end up with a 30-page contract for some handiwork around that's going to cost you, $3,000 or $4,000? Probably not. But you want to have something in place that protects the association. You want to make sure that that contractor has insurance, that they're qualified to be doing what they're doing, not just in the licensing sense, but have they done it before? Because, and the easiest way to think about this is think about those after the fact questions. If somebody came up to you and after everything went wrong and they said, well, you hired this fella to do something, but he has never done it before. Would you be comfortable asking the question, why? And it's an important kind of gut check. Put yourself in the future, ask your future self that question. Why did you choose that person? And see if you have good reasons. Well, you did a little background checking, or somebody responsible to the association did that. They have experience in the field. They have a license. They have insurance. They have workers that are authorized to work in the United States. I mean, those sort of things. And again, not a 30-page contract for every small deal, but you want to have something in place, even if it's an addendum that you attach to a proposal that covers those sort of basic issues. And again, those are the kind of things you're going back to an attorney to draft for you. And that kind of brings up a different point. Is part of your duty is to rely on professionals. And this is going to sound incredibly self-serving as attorneys sitting here. You need to contact attorneys on these questions, but not just attorneys, managers, maybe engineers, architects, depending on whatever the job might be. We see a lot of folks who might have a seawall project, or they need to do some significant roofing work. And someone along the way will suggest an engineer to monitor the contractor, to set out the specs for the contractor. It's an extra cost. It's not an insignificant cost. And a lot of times the tendency is to want to shortcut it. Your duty as a board is to seriously consider hiring that engineer, hiring that person who can assist you in looking over the project. You're responsible for supervising all of the work as a board member, all of the work that's done on the association's behalf. So it's your job to make sure that you understand at least as much as you can what your lawyer is doing for you, what your manager is doing for you, what your roofing contractor is doing for you. And the roofing contractor, that can get a little difficult. And that's why you have an engineer involved who can translate some of those issues for you. One thing we see, and I don't mean to beat up on roofing contractors today, but just by way of an example, in the old days, every time a contractor finished every little phase of construction, the county inspector would come out and look at it, and they would have to pass that interim inspection before they could move on to the next step. What we're seeing now is that contractors are permitted to just take pictures and continue moving forward in the project. And the county or the city inspector is relying on those photographs and looking at the final product. Well, if your roofing contractors and all of the folks doing the work for them are incredibly honest and they make no mistakes and they forget nothing, then that's great. But if they're human, and I suspect most of them are, then they're going to make mistakes. There might be, an incentive to cut a corner here or there. And by having an engineer follow along and check on the work along the way, you end up with a much better product at the end. You ensure that, yes, this project was done, correctly, at least more or less correctly. There's always a room for error. But that way, you're not just relying on a county inspector or a city inspector who came along after the fact and looked at the roof that was finished and never saw the underlying materials or construction that went into it. So that's what we mean by your duty to supervise, is to keep your eye on the ball. And if you're not sure what you're looking at, hire those professionals who can help you understand what you're looking at. And that, to me, that's one of the bigger duties that you have as a board member.
Well, going along with that, one of the basic things also is to make sure that the association is only contracting for things that they have the authority to contract for. Going back to roofing, we represented an association several years ago. Well, we still represent them, but several years ago, there was an issue where they contracted to have something done and they didn't have the authority to do that. It was an owner responsibility. They took it on, assuming it was a best interest in the community, which is a good thing, right? But the bad thing is when somebody got hurt. And when somebody got hurt, then it dovetails right back into, does the association have the authority to do this work that they obligated themselves to do? And it became quite a big issue. To make sure that the association has the authority, the obligation to do whatever it is that they want to do. Sometimes boards want to do very good for the community. And I think most of the time that is the case, but that they want to do too good for the community and they want to do things that, it would absolutely benefit the community, but they just don't have the authority within the documents to do that. And typically you can obtain that authority if you amend the governing documents. If the membership gives you the authority by an amendment, then you're good. But don't cut corners, like Larry said. That is just, it's not the way to do things. It really can be a big problem for you as a board member, because you may not have the protection of the association's directors and officers insurance if you don't follow your fiduciary duty responsibilities, and that's a big thing.
Right. So another another power and duty combination that you frequently run into, especially in communities that are older, have older documents. And I'm speaking strictly of the age of the community, nothing else. But communities that have been around for a while, they often have older documents, a little bit difficult to amend those sometimes. And so instead of amending to do certain things that the community wants to do, they just sort of start doing it. And one of the biggest and probably most hazardous examples are tenant and purchaser screening. And what we see there is, again, a lot of communities don't have the authority or the power within their governing documents to screen tenants, to screen purchasers. And I think tenants is the more common issue, because you see tenants come in and there's this, this stereotype that tenants, when they move in, they don't take as good of care of the community or their unit. Maybe if they fall behind in rent, then the owner falls behind on the condo dues or the HOA assessments. And so there's a lot of focus put on, well, who's moving in? And that conversation often starts, and before you know it, communities are collecting social security numbers, running credit background checks, checking criminal backgrounds, and then making decisions based on those criteria. If the community doesn't have the power to do it, then the board has a duty not to do it. Because just like Claire was saying, you're stepping outside of what the association is authorized to do. And sometimes that D&O coverage may not be available, which means if there's a suit, instead of an insurance carrier picking up a lot of the cost of defending it, or even the actual damages that are paid out, your community might have to pay it. So it's very important, again, as part of your duties, is to review your governing documents. This seminar satisfies the statutory requirement that you either sit for a certification class like this, or that you read through your governing documents and Chapter 20 if you're on an HOA board, or Chapter 718 if you're in a condo board. And it's great. Honestly, I think the requirement should be both instead of either, because we're going to talk to you today in very general terms, but so much depends on what your governing documents say. So much depends on you having a working knowledge of what the statute says. But those governing documents are important. Tenant screening, for instance, is not in the statutes. It's not provided there. Where it's provided, if it's provided, is in your governing documents. And so when you look at your declaration and your bylaws, if you don't see the ability to approve tenants, if you don't see the ability to set a credit score as a criteria, or a certain criminal background threshold as a criteria, yet you're doing that, you have a duty as a board member to speak up and say, well, maybe we need to take a step back and curtail what we're doing, and or attempt to amend your documents to make your documents match the practice of what you're doing. A lot of times when Claire and I are advising associations on their governing documents, it's not so much what we think their governing documents ought to say. There's some things where we say, well, let's bring them up to speed and align them more with the statute. But more importantly is to make sure that your practices, what your association is doing day to day, the directors, but more importantly probably are your managers and the folks who are doing this stuff for you, to make sure that your documents reflect and provide a legal foundation for everything that you're doing. Very important duty is to know what your particular association can do, and to supervise and make sure that it's staying within those boundaries. There's a lot of websites, there's these seminars, a lot of information, a lot of general information about what an HOA can do and what a condo can do. What's important for you and your duty is to find out what your condo or what your HOA can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on a little bit more about contracts, and because it goes along with your fiduciary duty, and maybe when you have a person coming into the community doing some work, and the board member wants to hire them directly to do work for them. And who should we refer to? Maybe landscaper? And
Sure.
so this will gear more towards like a homeowners association where you have a landscaper in there, and maybe you individually, you would like a tree taken out or some shrubberies changed out, or plantings, what have you. And you think, oh, well, you know the association's landscaper, you have a good relationship with them, and so you're going to ask them to maybe do some personal work for you. It's just not a good idea. Unfortunately, it's not a good idea. Yes, you could do it on the up and up. They could give you a contract and you could, pay them personally, and maybe that's okay, but please don't ever accept oh, we'll just do it from the landscaper. Don't accept it for nothing. And it's a better practice simply to not use them, because then it doesn't look bad within the community. Typically in a community, you're going to have a few outliers, and you're going to have people that are just looking for a reason to make an issue of maybe nothing. What is it, the old saying, the mountain out of a molehill? It's just really not a good idea. It just doesn't look good. And definitely do not take anything for free from any of your association vendors.
Correct. Do you have any more on powers and duties, or?
No, I think that we'll go kind of into the operations, if you're good with that.
Sure.
Operations, and I think that still dovetails back into contracts, because I think we should still go ahead and do a little bit more of contracts. And sorry to bore you guys about that, but with regards to the operations of the community, many of you, and we always suggest to have a management company, because most of the time board members are not compensated at all. There are a few communities where the governing documents allow the waiver of assessments for payment. And as long as the governing documents allow for it, then it can, that is okay. But those are far and few between. So, and even if that is the case, it's always good to have a management company, because that's what they do. They'll deal with all the things that the board may or may not have some particular expertise in, but it's a streamline. That's they are licensed to do that. GRS is one of the sponsors today, and we appreciate Peggy, and we appreciate the relationships we have had with GRS over the years. And there are other management communities, and of course there are some communities that self-manage. But that is one of the operational aspects of having an association. And even when you're contracting with a management company, it's a good idea to have the association's attorney review it. Like Larry said earlier, even if it's a one-page type of contract, and I'll say it again, roofing contracts are typically a one-page estimate, and you sign here at the bottom, but there are no protections in there for anyone, whether it be you individually or association-wise. So please don't ever sign a contract without getting the advice from the association's attorney. It can be an addendum. They'll talk to you for a little bit. Typically, unless it's some humongous project, it's not going to cost that much in attorney's fees, and it will save so much grief and probably money in the long run if something were to happen if you had not have gone this route. It is extremely important to do that. If you don't take anything else away from today, take that away, that when an association has a contract, please let the association's attorney take a look at it. That brings up the point of a manager. The manager, they're a terrific resource for the community. However, they're not attorneys. and they can't practice law. So it's not that they don't know, it's that they can't. And you're putting them in a terrible position if you're asking them to look at a contract and give you advice on it, because that is the practice of law, and that's not authorized. And so again, just have those contracts looked at by your association's attorney. You have any more on that? Are you gonna beat that that horse?
I'm gonna beat it 2 more times fairly briefly. I'm handling a suit we handled a little while ago, where an association entered into an agreement, and they're working with a particular management company now. They were working with a previous one before when they entered into this agreement. And when they asked me, and they said, well, we want to terminate this agreement. It says we can terminate it within 30 days. And I'm looking at the agreement, and I'm reading it over and over again, and I'm not finding the 30-day out. And all I'm seeing is a 10-year agreement entered into 3 years ago. And I go back and forth with the president, and finally she sends me an email from the property manager saying both sides have this 30-day out. Well, the property manager meant well. It's probably what the property manager got from perhaps the vendor, or maybe came up in the course of the conversation. But in essence, the president of this association is relying on an electrician to tell her about plumbing work. It's important to talk to the right people about, about the subject matter that you're asking a question about. Again, going back to the roofing contractor example, is a lot of times a roofer will say, no, the city doesn't require that. Well, everything that the city requires is typically in their municipal code, or the county in their county ordinance, and relatively easy to find. When you're asking a roofing contractor, do we need to do these certain things? Do we need a permit for that or this? Those are legal questions, and the contractor wants the job, and they may mean well in answering the question quickly, but you would ask your lawyer about that. Sometimes I'm asked questions that I certainly don't know the answer to, because it's really a management question. So it's not that the lawyers are all knowing, or that somehow we have all the answers. The important thing is that when you're asking the questions, or when you're relying on advice, that you're relying on legal advice from lawyers, from management advice from managers, from roofing advice from roofing contractors, and so on. And it's important, again, to be talking and getting the information from the right person. And that's it.
Okay, so back, well, we're still in operations, and,
Right.
and with regards to the operations, and then you're talking about you mentioned managers. One thing that comes up a lot is, who does the manager work for? Well, it comes up a lot with us too when we have a disgruntled homeowner within an association. Well, don't we as the attorneys work for them as the unit owner? Well, sort of, but we work for the association. Managers also work for the association, but the board of directors are the ones that are either elected or were appointed at some point by the membership, or by another board member, or what have you. But it's the board of directors that we as attorneys, and that as the managers, they report to. But we work for the association, but we have to take direction from the board of directors. Now, what happens when you have a board of directors, all of them, 7, let's say it's a board of 7, and they're not all on the same page, and you're getting, the president tells you to do A and the secretary tells you to do B. Well, not one of them really has the authority to direct anyone. However, it is a good idea at a board meeting to have the directors decide who is their point of contact going to be, and who can the manager take direction from. It's going to typically be the president, unless the president wants to appoint, let's say, sometimes they'll have a legal liaison. Perhaps they'll have a management liaison. So one of the ways that an association can assist with the streamlining of you know, who should the manager report to or take direction from is by voting on that at a board meeting and putting it in the minutes of the meeting. But in the end, the management company and the legal counsel and everybody, they work for the association, but they serve at the pleasure of the board of directors. Go with
Right.
that.
So a lot of times you as a director are going to run into those situations where you've called the manager and you've said, I want you to do this. Maybe you stopped by the manager's office and you said, you know, why can't we have the landscaper cut these a little shorter? And you may get frustrated because it doesn't happen. And very often I get phone calls from directors who are expressing that frustration, and it seems all focused on the manager. But it's important to understand, like Claire was saying, who the manager reports to, who the manager has to take their direction from. And so you try not to get too frustrated when your manager says, I can't do that right now, or, you know, we'll have to take it up with the rest of the board. That's the manager's best response, unless you happen to be that person that the board designated to instruct the manager. Otherwise, if the manager, if you have a 5 or 7 member board, if the manager were taking direction from each of them, from each director on those boards, then there's always going to be conflicting instructions or instructions that sort of overlap, that aren't consistent, and it just sets your team up for failure. Same thing works for the lawyers. Same thing works for landscapers. We often see that too, where a director will come out of their house one morning and see the landscapers aren't doing what that director thinks that they decided at the last board meeting, and starts giving direction. Always remember, these folks all work for the association at the direction of the board. They work at the pleasure of the board. So it's the board that has to make those decisions. So as a director, you've got to refocus yourself to come back to the next board meeting. If it's important enough, you know, usually your bylaws will allow 1 or 2 of you to force a special board meeting in between. But have that discussion. And of course you have email, and while you can't make decisions by email, you can certainly discuss that by email, and hopefully there's a good solution that doesn't require a whole lot of heavy lifting, and the right person on the board can provide that instruction to make the correction or explain why it was done that way. But remember, you as directors, you can't blame the manager, you can't blame the landscaper or even the lawyer if they don't take your instructions directly. They really have to work from what the board tells them to do, or what that board designee tells them to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so moving in, still on operations, insurance. Insurance for communities, I think in general, in Palm Beach County, what we've been seeing anyway, is it's going up.
Wow.
It is going up quite a bit. I've seen around 30% across the board increase. And what that means is that the assessments for the membership is going to increase. And sometimes I've seen just recently where the insurance premiums the renewals are coming around now, but assessments have been set for the year. But if it is at such an increase, some associations are going to have to go and amend the budget to make the remainder of the year, the fourth quarter assessment, or if it's monthly assessments, increase to absorb that increase in the insurance premium. It is just crazy right now, and that's an unfortunate situation, but I don't know what else the association can do about that. You have to insure, and remember the fiduciary duty hat. You have to, whatever your governing documents require you to insure, make sure that is being done. You should have reserve studies done on a regular basis to make sure that the amount of insurance that you're carrying on the association is still adequate. because what the values of your community were 5 years ago are likely not what they are today. They hopefully have increased, but with that comes an increase in the insurance amount you need to carry, and that increases the premium, which then of course increases the assessment. But it's just part of living in a community association. You have more to say about that? Larry loves to talk, so.
I do. And usually I have something to say about just about everything. Gets me in trouble at home, but the insurance, like Claire said, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. It's very much like your property taxes. They're going to go up, and it's just this hard monolithic cost in your budget that you can't deal with on the personal side. But then on the association side, insurance takes that place. You know, when Claire talked about amending the budget, that is it's a tough conversation to have with your membership in the middle of the year.
And especially now.
Especially now. It causes all kinds of disruptions because you've got perhaps coupon books out there, statements. And I hate to keep saying this, but just like I enjoy talking a lot, you almost have to enjoy talking a lot, or at least listening a lot, having a lot of conversations. And so let's enter somebody that we haven't talked about already, and that's your insurance agent. Your insurance agent works for you. They get you know, a percentage of your premium that you pay. That's how they earn their living. And that's their compensation for administering your insurance policy, your insurance portfolio, and providing that service to you. Within that service is their wisdom. I go to a lot of board meetings where at first I thought it was sort of an afterthought, and I do see you know, good boards and good managers will bring that insurance agent in, not right there on the eve of renewal, but ahead of time to discuss what they're looking at. When you start budgeting, you know, depending on when your renewals are, and sometimes they're not convenient to the budgeting, but your insurance agent can give you a good idea of what your premium is going to be the next year. It's still a guess, but if your insurance agent is warning you that it might be a 10 or 15% increase, then you should probably take that at least to the bank as a figure of speech. You're not taking anything to the bank, I guess. But to take that information and factor it into your budgeting to avoid that shortfall in the following year. It's very long term. You're trying to find out in September and October what your May renewal might bump you up to, but you have to do a good job to try to estimate it. You can't estimate it if you've never had that conversation with your insurance agent. A lot of times that information will come through the property manager, and that can be okay if you have a good stream of communication there, but it never hurts to ask the insurance agent to come out and talk to you. The other part of the conversation with the insurance agent is understanding your coverages. We talk about governing documents, and we talk about your declaration of covenants or your declaration of condo and your bylaws and your articles of incorporation. And we talk about the statute. But one huge document that governs a lot of what you can and can't do is your insurance policy. And very often we see directors make very offhand comments about what's covered and what's not. That conversation with the insurance agent can kind of help you keep on track and understand where your coverages lie. You know, do you cover this particular part of a building, like say the roof or the windows? And do you cover them for normal things, or do you just cover them when there's a windstorm casualty?
And what is the deductible?
And
who pays the deductible?
Right. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. And that's part of how you operate as an association, is having at least having that information in the back of your mind. Directors' jobs sometimes, especially in the insurance context and some other areas, are a little bit like lawyers. When we go to law school, we don't learn all of the law. The biggest takeaway we get from law school is what we call issue spotting. And it's to be able to know that an issue exists, to see a situation, to see a bunch of facts and go, oh, these are the legal problems involved. No one, except maybe you as directors, no one really expects us to have answers at the snap of a finger all the time. But just the same thing is with you as directors. You're not expected to know everything we talk about here today, everything in your governing documents, everything in the statute, and everything in your insurance policy off the top of your head. But it's important to have enough of those conversations with your insurance agent to understand, okay, well, that's a question we should ask. That's not something I can just tell this member yes or no on without getting a much better answer. Because that yes or no can be a fork in the road where you tell them yes and they go off in one direction. They may spend a lot of money based on your yes. But if the answer was no or maybe or something else, you might have cost your member a lot of money. And so very important not to answer those sort of questions off the top of your head, and just things take time, but allow the right answer to come back from the professionals.
Okay.
The other kind of very common thing in terms of operations are your meetings. Your managers always put this together. If you're self-managed, you have that one association member who's always put it together and who's always done it probably. But it's important to know that it is ultimately the board's responsibility to have meetings, but to also set up and schedule the annual meetings. Very often we help prepare notices, and we look in the governing documents and we find that the board's meeting in January, when they're supposed to be meeting on literally the second Tuesday at 3 o'clock in November. A lot of times bylaws have, especially the older ones, have some crazy provisions like that. Again, knowing your governing documents, scheduling those meetings, very often those annual meetings that you're responsible for making sure happen. Notices.
So what happens?
If you don't?
Well, so what happens if my documents say I'm supposed to have the meeting on the second Tuesday in November at 3 o'clock, and we haven't done that in years or ever?
It's a tough question, and there's no good answer. The best answer is you go back in time and redo them, but of course that's never possible. The best answer is you try to bring yourself in line with your documents as quickly as you can, or you try to amend them.
Amend the governing documents. Give yourself some leeway there if you can.
Right.
If you can. Sometimes the governing documents are quite difficult to amend it. In other words, it requires such a large percentage of the membership, which sometimes is not easy to obtain. But sorry for that.
No, that's okay. So where you can, again, if you've been meeting in January and that works for the association, then if you, again, going back to the principle of amending your documents if you can, to match what you're doing, to support what you're doing. But in any event, you have to make sure that meeting takes place. In condos and in a lot of homeowners associations, there's a lot of things that happen before you just show up at that meeting. There's a 60-day notice, which can't be first thought about on day 60 or day meeting minus 60. You've got to think about it a little bit ahead of time to get it drafted, to get it prepared and in the mail. There's other notices that have to happen during that process. Even if you don't have that 60-day window before your annual meeting, you may have requirements in your documents for nominating committees. You may have provisions in your documents for sending out or soliciting people to join the board and to throw their hat in the ring. This is another tricky one that we can't advise you specifically on, except in in the condominium context. In the HOA context, your election process is very much wrapped up into your governing documents. And then the legislature, I think just for fun, tweaked that a little bit so that you have to look at your governing documents. And this is literally how I analyze it for some associations. I look at their governing documents, I look at the statute, I look back at their governing documents, and hopefully I'm done, but sometimes I'm going back and forth a couple times just because of the way the statute is worded and the ifs and all the caveats in the statute.
I think they the statute was meant to try to assist, but it really just created more unclarity.
Right. So, so important to have all that set. The good news is the statute doesn't change that often. And once you have a good process in place, so again, if someone's been putting all those documents or all those notices together forever, it never hurts, even if it might offend some folks, it never hurts to take a fresh look, make sure everything lines up with the statute, and then you're going to probably be good for a little while. And you keep your ear to the ground, and you hear if another statutory changes. Hopefully your lawyer is getting that information to you, and then you can tweak again. But very important, and that's again, one of your duties and one of your operational responsibilities is to ensure that you have those meetings and that they're set up. It's very important in the annual meeting context, because if you take some shortcuts on your annual meeting preparation, on your election preparation, it might look like that shortcut was taken because it benefited you. And you never want that situation. You don't want anybody looking and saying, well, this is rigged, and the same board, it keeps getting elected over and over again. You're already going to get that because that's what people often say. That's their easy way out of a frustrating argument. But you want to do what you can to avoid that. The other meetings that you must have each year are a budget meeting and the organizational meeting following your annual meeting. Even if there's no election at your annual meeting, even if there's no quorum at your annual meeting, you still have that organizational meeting every year to pick your officers. I would say almost always, again, check your documents, but almost always, your directorships are a year and then sometimes 2 years, and we represent one community that has a 3-year term. But your officers typically only serve 1 year. So you're always going to have that organizational meeting after your annual meeting, sometimes the same night, usually got to be at least within 10 days after that annual, to select your officers for the coming year. The other important meeting, obviously, is the budget meeting. And that's another must-have, because your duty and operational responsibility is to set the level of assessment for the coming year based on all the information you've gathered ahead of time. But everybody's entitled to notice, and they're entitled to see that meeting happen. You can't increase the assessments when nobody's looking. You have to do it in front of your membership, or in front of the membership willing to attend at that time.
With proper notice.
With proper notice. And again, it's important to understand your budget meeting is always going to require a minimum 14 days notice. Sometimes your bylaws may pad some more time in there, but at the very minimum, 14 days notice to the membership mailed out to them, unless they've opted for electronic mail, or electronic noticing rather. And, so you can't, it's not something you can just spring on folks. And then of course you want to meet, these are the optional ones, but a lot of boards meet every month. They meet quarterly, and you want to make sure that you're having enough of those meetings. Number one is satisfy your governing documents. Your documents or your bylaws might actually tell you how often you have to meet. But more importantly, to make sure that you're meeting enough to fulfill those duties we talked about early on. You're meeting enough to get together, to discuss, and perform your oversight of everyone working for you, the manager, the roofer, the insurance company, the roofing contractor, any landscaper, anybody else, and that you're meeting to make those decisions. It's not often that a board can go all year and just have a budget meeting and their organizational meeting. You generally are going to have to meet some other times. Things happen, things break, and you have to address those sort of issues.
And now is a great time because, well, I mean, not a great time because of the COVID, but it's a good time at least to utilize the new technology, the Zoom platform. Was it called Microsoft Teams?
Microsoft Teams.
There's another one, but
right.
But there are ways, even if you can't, or it's not safe to have an in-person meeting, there are ways to still have these meetings, electronically, and they have been working out very well. So because of the COVID, it doesn't mean that we can't get together. We're together right here, right now, and the board can do these types of meetings to satisfy their board requirements. They can also, you know, for the annual meeting, there are some ways to deal with that as well. You have to obviously look at the governing documents and you know, check with your association's attorney if you have any issues on your annual meetings. But there are ways to get these meetings done.
Yeah, last night I hosted a Zoom annual meeting for an association, and it was a hybrid. Some people came in person. So we had a camera set up to capture the board members and any of the association members that appeared. And then some folks joined via Zoom, just like you are today. So it's very doable. I know if you haven't done it before, there's a lot of apprehension, but it's definitely doable. And we encourage you to do it. It's not clear sometimes whether or not, you know, you can do Zoom meetings. If it, you know, there are some folks out there that argue that you still kind of need that physical location. And if you're inclined to adhere to that, you can still do that sort of hybrid meeting where you have a meeting at a physical location, but allow other people to join by Zoom. If you think about some board meetings you might have attended, you might have some board members who are present, and maybe one's traveling and they telephone into the meeting, and someone puts their cell phone on the center of the table and acts as a speakerphone. Same principle can apply to your annual meetings and to other board meetings, where you're not necessarily using the phone, but you're using a Zoom or similar platform like this. So, you know, we encourage you to do it. The alternative is to not have meetings. And there was a brief time in this current crisis when that was okay. And I think both because of the lifting of certain emergency orders and just because we've all kind of gotten used to this now for the most part, the excuse to not have a board or an annual meeting really is going away. And it's really time to get back on board and start having them. And I think, you know, in terms of operations, that's all we're going to have time to cover today. Claire was correct. I could talk forever. So then the next topic we'll cover, and just to balance things out, I'm going to ask Claire to start it off, is on official records and copying and inspecting your official records.
Official records, you have to have them. You have to keep them for a certain length of time. So what are your official records? Your governing documents, your declaration, your articles, your bylaws, your rules and regulations. And so you need to maintain them. You need to maintain them here in Florida. That's pretty easy these days. I think you have to maintain them in the county or within so many miles. But typically that's not an issue. And especially with condominiums, having to have with the threshold of units, having to have their own websites now and what have you. Most of the governing documents, and all of them should, or the official records, I should say, what other governing documents are recorded. They should be recorded. They should be accessible. They should be on your website. When a unit owner wants to inspect the official records, which are much more than just the governing documents, we'll go over that in just a second. But when they want to see the official records, the governing documents, they should be there. I mean, it's not a secret. And, you know, I've seen so many people like, oh, shouldn't have they gotten a copy of that when they bought their place? Well, the answer is yes, but who knows what they did with it. And the association is obligated to retain them, have copies of them. With the digital age that we're in, why is it a secret and why does it have to be so difficult? It shouldn't be. Don't let that be an issue within your community. Have them available. You know, people are allowed to go in and they can request to inspect the official records. Well, do you want people to do that? Do you want, you know, if they need just to look at the governing documents, the bylaws, the declaration, the articles of incorporation, the rules and regulations. There are most of those, besides the rules and regulations, which some of them have to be recorded now. They're all recorded on the public records anyway, so just have them available for your members. That's what I have to say about that. But official records, all of them. Contracts, insurance policies is a huge one. I'm gonna leave that for a little bit because there's another little caveat for insurance policies. Your minutes to the association, the minutes of your meetings, those are an association official record. So those have to be maintained and kept for your community for 7 years.
Nope, now
That's
indefinitely.
10?
Now
Oh, indefinitely
right?
for both, indefinitely for both, forever. Keep them. See, that's my age talking there. Larry's younger than me. What else?
I just want to touch on the website. Even if you're not required to maintain a website, think about this. You know, from the point of view of employing your property manager, do you want your management company or your manager spending time gathering official records, sitting down with somebody who's requesting them, and controlling that access to them so they can copy and inspect them? Or would you rather your property manager and your management company supervising landscaping, making sure the lawyer's gotten back to you, making sure that the roofing contractor and the engineer are on task? Those are the sort of things that you ask your property manager to do. In the old days, they also had to do these official records requests because we didn't have websites. But now, even if you're not required to have a website, there is a huge value to getting that information on your website and getting it cataloged. Because then people, they're not spending that time doing those sort of things. If you're self-managed, or if your board members help out with that sort of task, your time, even if it's not compensated, it is pretty valuable, because you want to stay refreshed. You want to be working on things that are important. You want to be working on things that advance your community. And if you're dealing with a lot of these little administrative things, those that you can cut out, like official records requests, because you've got the information on your website, that'll keep you refreshed. It'll keep you wanting to volunteer a little bit longer to help your fellow board members continue to volunteer longer. And that time is valuable. So I just like Claire, I strongly urge you to move these documents to a website as much as you can and get them accessible to all your members easily.
Now, the insurance contract, that's something that maybe, I don't know that I would recommend you make readily accessible. And the reason being is the insurance certificate, yes, to show that you guys have the insurance, that's not the issue. The issue with the insurance contract is that then some folks will try to submit a claim by themselves without going through the management company and or board. And that can become a problem for your association, because when a claim is made, even if it's not accepted by the insurance company, it can still create I don't know what kind of term I want to use here, but it's an entry anyway on your loss run, and that may affect your premium pricing for the following year. So when you are looking at when you're going out to get quotes for your insurance and talk to your insurance agent about this, whether or not what their process is. Some insurance agencies have like an intake person that will evaluate the claim so that it won't get reported without the proper authorization. I'll say it that way, because otherwise you could have so many claims that really weren't even authorized, but they could possibly affect your premium negatively, like making it increase.
And we just had this happen in the past year where the insurance agent came back to one of our client associations and said, your premium on this particular kind of policy that really would not have seen a significant increase is not only going to be significantly increased, it's going to have to go with a different carrier because the carrier that you were with dropped. And the question was, well, gosh, what happened? Why did that occur? And it all became because of one claim that made it all the way to the carrier. And it's very much like a bell. You can't really unring that bell. And that claim made it to the carrier when it should have never made it that far. It should have been, an association decision on whether or not to submit that claim or to handle it internally. So, I agree.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you have to give it to an owner that requests it. But I just don't know that I would actually put that up, except for where you have to. I wouldn't make it readily available if you don't have to. But you do have to obviously maintain it as an official record. So
and remember, some records are not inspectable, and so I got a little eager there about throw everything up on the website. So sometimes talking gets I put my foot in my mouth. There's going to be some things that you don't want in there, and so like Claire was talking about the insurance policy and all those other things that are not available for inspection. So attorney-client privilege material, personnel records. If the association employs somebody, you wouldn't want to put their W-2 on a website. A lot of tenant applications. If you're authorized to screen them, but your tenant applications may have social security numbers on them. They may have other personal identifiable information on them. And that's not the kind of stuff that you want to, put up on the web. So obviously within reason, but the common things, those things that you would have to show and you'd have to reveal for inspection anyway, and those things,
I would do bylaws, articles,
Right.
declaration, rules and regulations, obviously applications for sales and leases if you're authorized to do
Right.
that. But
If they've been-
but there's quite a bit of official records that you aren't going to
Correct.
put up there because you're going to have assessment. You're going to the ledgers and things. I mean, they're inspectable, but I wouldn't put them up on the
Right.
on the website for sure. But and again, there is a list of what your official records are, which includes the governing documents. That's just a subset of it. And those official records are inspectable and by the membership upon written request to do that.
Okay.
So I think is that it? I think we're,
Yeah, the last thing I just in terms of inspection and copying, just remember, for those documents you do maintain on paper, you do maintain on a computer hard drive that you have to provide to somebody. You're not required to be their clerk. You're required to allow them to be inspected and to allow copies to be made. So sometimes we see folks get involved in this habit of somebody asked for this document and the property manager just wanting to work down their email will quickly shoot it out in an email to them. And then there's another request, and then there's another request. And, to the extent that you can, to the extent that you're not being unreasonable, have a process in place where people do, for those things that are not available on your website, they do come in, they sit down, they inspect them, they copy the records that they need or that they've requested. But you don't want to end up in a situation where they can just, your members email you document requests and you're just turning them around all the time.
and I just want to jump in right there. Try to hold your thought. You can write down.
Sure.
Is because one of the things is that, remember, you have to treat everybody the same. We didn't really touch on that, but you have to treat everybody the same. There's no selective enforcement. There's no favors. Even if you personally dislike somebody in your community, if they're doing an official records request, and sure, they're probably, I don't know about that, but I've seen where it's just they're trying to be a bother. But you can't say, oh yes, the person I like that lives 3 doors down from me, yeah, give them those copies. But the person that lives across the street from me that I don't like, oh no, they have to go in and look at the official records. No, please don't do that. Treat everybody the same. If your manager is going to give the person you like copies of whatever they want, then they're going to have to give the person you don't like copies of whatever they want. So the better practice is simply make everybody come in and look at the documents themselves.
And that's why we're a team, because she just teed up what I was going to say. It was a perfect segue. No, it was perfect. The way to treat everybody the same is objectivity, right? Everything is objective. There's no subjective way that you deal with everybody. And the way to be objective in this context is to follow the statute, which allows you to the board can enact a rule regarding the frequency, the time, the date, and the duration of inspection requests. And obviously it has to be reasonable, and the statute, I think, uses the word reasonable. But you can make it, so that members can't request something every day or every week, perhaps. As long as you have a reasonable mechanism for them to inspect the records and to request that inspection, then you're golden, because you treat everybody according to those rules. So you enact a rule regarding the frequency and time and so forth, and then you follow that rule for everybody. And it's going to be very difficult for anybody to complain that somebody got favorable treatment. And of course, that's a concept you can extend to everything that you do, but definitely in the official records context, adopt a rule. Take that time at a board meeting to actually set up a rule, talk to your lawyer. It shouldn't take much to iron out a quick one-page bullet pointed rule to deal with that. And I think that's all we're going to ramble about.
Right, because we wanted to leave plenty of time for anybody that has some questions. And again, I want to thank our sponsors, and especially Jonathan for setting the website up and everything, and Peggy for everything she's done behind the scenes as well. Both of those folks are terrific, and then so thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I know there's a lot of bit of work goes into it. We email these little requests along the way, and you guys make it all happen, and then we just sit down here and talk. So no, we really do appreciate it.
Oh, I think you guys have the more difficult one. I can't talk about half the things that you spoke about today. But thank you very much, and I appreciate it. And we do have some questions that came in. Is now an appropriate time to address those?
Absolutely.
Sure. Okay, cool. Well, I've got one that's kind of a 1-2 punch from 2 different folks. One, are notice requirements altered during COVID? And second, when and can an emergency meeting be called, and how much notice is given? I think those kind of go well together.
Sure.
I'm not really understanding the first one. Something about that is the question: did the notice requirements change during COVID? Is that the question?
Exactly. Yeah. During and are they still being?
I'm not aware of any. Are you aware of any? I mean, there's the notice.
No. So this came up for a brief time during the early part of the crisis, where there's a provision in each of the condo, the HOA statute, that talks about emergency powers. And under those emergency powers, notices can be abbreviated, they can be shortened, you can meet without notice, with less notice than you would normally require. The trick here is the purpose of your meeting has to relate to something you're doing about the emergency that's within your powers. There are like 4 different requirements there. Those emergency power statutes are really drafted in the hurricane context. So hurricane comes through, there is tree and debris everywhere, and you need to contract with somebody to get it cleaned up. And you don't have the time to wait 48 hours while everyone else takes all those contractors away from you. So you can have a no-notice board meeting to contract with somebody to get the debris and get all those safety issues cleared up. In COVID, we really don't have those sort of, knee-jerk emergencies. Even, so one of the flashpoints was closing the swimming pools. But even in that situation, you, at least in Palm Beach County, and I know other counties follow this protocol, the county ordered those closed. So there really wasn't a decision for the board to make per se. I don't know that the board really had to meet to decide to comply with an emergency order from the county. So there may be some situations, but in general, I would find it very hard to imagine a notice requirement that has been waived or wouldn't need to happen because of the coronavirus. And then I think the second question was the notice requirements for an emergency meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, you would be following those emergency powers under the statute. And again, they're only triggered if you're actually and legitimately responding to something caused by the emergency. Go back to the hurricane example because it's a little more illustrative. If a hurricane comes through and you sustain no damage, but you really want to paint those walls now, you're not having an emergency meeting to hire a painting contractor because there's no nexus, there's no connection between damage caused by the emergency that you're deciding upon. So it's very few and far between that you'll see emergency powers or emergency meetings having actual legal support. It happens, but far less than it's talked about.
Can I just interject something?
Yes, ma'am.
Not to take away from your speaker platform, but it's a really good idea to the boards out there to go on and pre-hire a cleanup company. Because if you have, they have a list actually, and if you're on that list and you call and you need some help, you don't have to get in line behind 20, 30 communities. So, again, it's going to be a contract, so you want to have that pre-looked at by your attorneys. At the same time, you want to also get ahead of the game, maybe be in the top 10 of the companies that they're going to come through, especially if you have a lot of trees and things to worry about on your property.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Thank you for interjecting that.
You're welcome.
What's next?
So we've got one from Lawrence here. Are there any payroll or managerial contracts or salaries that board of directors are not allowed to see?
A board is not allowed to see?
Correct.
No, I can't think of a board. No, the board is the one that's making the decision for those things. Because the buck stops with the board has to have all of the information available to it. The only exception that comes to mind maybe is if you have a particular board member who is at odds with the association. So on that particular issue, there may be some information that board member can't see. Let's say you've had to hire an attorney, the association had to hire an attorney to work with the dispute with that particular board member, then that board member, for those purposes, is, I don't want to say not on the board, but is not privy to all of the information the board would have because they're adversarial. Right. So, but again, just like emergency powers, it's few and far between, and it would be very rare that the board would not have access to all of the information in it. That said, though, I have had conversations with boards, and I've suggested that they not, going back to tenant applications, sometimes they have the Social Security number on them. I generally recommend that boards of directors do not have too much, too much hands-on in terms of making those tenant screening decisions. Because again, you want them to be objective decisions. And if it's something that gets passed around the board and everybody comments about, that rent's kind of high for that unit, or I can't believe they're getting a mortgage. It starts little things that slip out into a rumor mill that really are unnecessary. And if that tenant screen package or that purchaser application has a Social Security number on it or has some personal identifying information, and you circulate it to the board by email, remember, most of you, if not all of you,
don't have an email address that's owned by the association. So, and I don't want to pick on one particular company, but Gmail or Google, if I email you that, that tenant screening questionnaire, that may show up in a search result somewhere. It may not be as secure as everyone thought it would be. So while you're entitled to that information, sometimes it might be the type of thing where if the board's really going to look at these tenant screening packets, maybe they need to come in and take a look at them or view them in such a way that it doesn't end up in someone's email inbox that can be accidentally searched or forwarded onto somebody else. But as a rule, you're entitled to the information, just maybe the way you see it, it would be smarter to do it differently.
Thanks for that. I've got another from George. He submitted valid records request for an HOA. The HOA ignored his request, and he's kind of wondering what his options are. Is it to pursue mediation at his expense, or are there other ways to get those records?
Well, that's not of the purpose of this. That is not a board function. The question is really being asked as an individual unit owner, and so it's really not part of today's discussion.
Okay, we could go ahead and take a look at another. Is there liability against the board if no meetings are called and no records are available to the new board? We're getting some doozies today, I think.
Right.
What is?
So is there liability for when a turnover?
Oh yeah, there is.
Yeah.
It's difficult. It's a process, but there is
Right.
a process.
And we urge caution here for a couple of reasons. A lot of times when there's a new board in and this sort of issue or question comes up about, well, the previous board didn't do this or they failed to do that. My counsel usually is at that point is to look forward. You were brought in to fix things, to change things, and that's really sure your focus should be and try to avoid the punitive. Now, if a director hasn't turned over documents after they've left office, or if an officer hasn't turned over documents after they left office, absolutely, I guess it's one of your last duties as a director, and it's a duty that continues on even after you're out of office, is to make sure you turn over those documents. The standard is in 5 days, and it would include any documents in your possession that, particularly originals, stuff that aren't just copies of something the association has, keys, passcodes, if you have a fob that you use to get into an office that members don't typically have, if you have some sort of access card or device used to access a bank account or anything like that, then all of that stuff should be surrendered within 5 days. And if I'm a director, I want to surrender it even faster. I want to, I don't want anybody accusing me of doing something crazy in that 5 days. But other than that, and again, we have real world experiences here. We represent an association that the new board came in and they decided to go complain to DBPR about what some of the things that the old board failed to do and some of the bad things that they did do. And DBPR came back and they reprimanded the association. Very important. I try to get people away from the concept of that board or this board. When the board makes a decision or an officer does something on behalf of the association, it is the association doing it. So you want to be very careful about, going back and telling on the previous board. You may think you scored some points. Emotionally, it might feel better. But at the end of the day, when the board did something, right or wrong, it was the association that did it. And now you're governing the association. And if you go to DBPR and you bring that sort of complaint against them, it's really against the association. And what you may find is you end up incurring attorney's fees to deal with that sort of situation. and perhaps some sort of reprimand or sanction from DBPR, when really if you knew what was supposed to be done right, just start doing it right and move forward. That's almost always the best course of action. But on that narrow issue of getting property and documents from the former directors, absolutely. And that, I would say that's part of the first duties of the new board, is to make sure that they've recovered all of that property.
And hopefully that, you know, not one person has the documents. Now, we're aware of some communities where they're self-managed, and they, you know, you have folks that have these documents and there's no copies and what have you, and that's a terrible practice. It is absolutely a terrible practice. And before we go on to the next one, I do want to go back, is the George that asked the last question. I don't want, I mean, it's not the purpose of this conversation or this class to deal with homeowner, unit owner issues like that. But I'm going to say this about that question, is that if an association does not provide access to the official records within 10 business days, then they are subject to a penalty of up to $50 a day for up to 10 days. So that's a $500 penalty. So I'm going to say that and leave it at that. That at least answers a little bit of the question towards, but flipped it around to the association obligation.
Thanks for clarifying. And I've got a follow-up for Lawrence, who is wondering about you know, documents that just weren't available to all board members. And he said that the HOA claims privacy for the manager's salary. Well, in that case, who would be the enforcer?
Well, yeah, let me address that. That might have been something I was too general on. If you have, you know, some associations are self-managed, some hire, you know, a full service professional management company like a GRS. Some associations directly hire their manager. And in those scenarios, the manager's salary, you know, in that direct hire situation, would certainly be something the board was entitled to know, because they have to make that decision. Now, when you hire, again, like a full service management company, the manager, the actual manager who's assigned to your community, their salary may be private to you. What you know about is what you're contracting the management company, what you're paying the management company to provide that individual manager to you, the support staff, the services, the estoppels, all those other things that go on behind the scenes. And so what that manager personally is making, what their company is personally paying them, may not be information that you're entitled to have, but that should be sort of understandable too. I mean, and really, you know, how important is that information to your decision making? What you're more concerned about is, you know, we've hired a management company to provide these you know, this menu of services to us, and are we getting, you know, our bang for the buck? And it really doesn't matter how much anybody within that organization is getting paid. You're really comparing what you're getting for what you're paying, and the comparison won't be with the manager's salary. The comparison would be the services rendered versus what another management company might provide to you in terms of services and how much to charge for. So that would be the exception, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Larry. We've got one coming from Greg. He says the Condo Association president has entered into contracts without board approval for things like fire system replacement, roof replacement, landscaping, the list goes on. But the management company hasn't done anything about it. You know, what would be the best course of action there?
Well, again, the management company works for the board, and I won't really comment on the first part of that question because, you know, again, you know, if a unit owner has those sort of complaints, then they have to work through the different mechanisms to address them. But, again, and I said earlier, directors, you can't get frustrated with the manager because the manager doesn't do something. This is something we also see a lot of times where a unit owner and director, they'll ask the manager or they'll inform the manager about something, and they get frustrated when they don't see the result that they expected from that exchange. Again, if you're on the board of directors, then it's certainly something you should bring up at the next board meeting, air it out. But at the end of the day, the manager takes that direction from the board. And if the board's indecisive, and usually there's an odd number of directors, and so there really should not be any tie votes or indecisiveness normally. But in the event the board hasn't made a decision, then arguably the manager, at least in the short term, has to rely on the direction from the president. The president's the chief executive officer of the association. But we would also encourage managers in that situation to maybe seek some guidance and make sure that they have the board, with the board's full understanding and accurate direction on each of those things.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We've got one from Mary Ellen. She's got two questions. The first is, are legal written opinions available to homeowners? And maybe this would require a little bit of clarification, or maybe you understand it. I'm guessing, could a homeowner maybe consult an attorney that's, also working for the community in certain matters?
Well, legal opinions, typically no, they're not. It's kept in a separate file, and there's certain legal opinions that are attorney-client privilege, and they are for the board of directors' eyes only.
Okay. Awesome.
Then the other one.
Can a board decide to remove a shuffleboard court and build pickleball courts instead? Do homeowners have a say? So I guess this kind of goes into, the power and authority of the board.
Yeah, you have to, typically the answer is you would have to have a vote of the membership. Is a common element if it's in a condominium association, and more than likely in a homeowners association as well, and an amenity that was provided. Unless there is something within the governing documents that allows the board to make those changes, then you would have to get membership approval.
Yeah, and just to piggyback onto that,
because he likes to talk, remember.
Sometimes it's a matter of degrees. So from shuffleboard to pickleball, wildly different, not wildly different, but significantly different sports and different layout in terms of the ground there, in terms of if you're doing a pickleball court, you've probably had to come in and maybe lay some additional asphalt or concrete to widen it beyond that shuffleboard lane or whatever. And if you have one shuffleboard court, then converting it to pickleball, I would say would require a membership vote unless the documents allow that to be a board decision. But we have some communities that have tennis courts, for instance, and the tennis court, maybe they have 4 full-size tennis courts. They're not actively used, and I'm talking more in an HOA context because there's a little bit more flexibility there. But so they took one tennis court and converted it to pickleball. And again, you're still playing across a net. It's still roughly the same thing. And again, they weren't filling all 4 courts. That's a relatively safe change to make. In the one particular association I worked with, one of the ideas we talked about was being able to quickly, convert it back if you need to. If the tennis court demand increases because of the season changes, maybe more people come back for the season and they say, where's my 4th tennis court? Then you'd want to be able to quickly change. And with pickleball, you can do that from pickleball to tennis and back. It's not that hard. But we have another community that has 2 tennis courts. They are never used. And their question was, could they convert it to more, to create additional parking? And that answer is it's always going to require membership approval because you're radically departing from what that amenity originally was intended to be for.
So any more questions?
I've got one. Let's see here. I know that we're kind of in the early stages yet with COVID, but is there any liability that could be placed on the board for, you know, maybe a egregious acts that would expose residents, you know, in some way, you know, maybe that be you know, amenities or different types of meetings or what have you. Have we seen any fingers pointed back to the board?
I think we're early
Yeah.
to really be able to answer that yet in terms of, you know, actually seeing lawsuits happen. The key thing to remember is that we haven't seen an insurance policy yet, and we've unfortunately read too many of them in the last few months. But we haven't seen one yet that provides coverage for pandemic-related claims. Even in the directors and officers policy, which the value there often is not paying anything out, the value is providing legal defense to the association or even to a particular director. Even in some of those, insurers are signaling that because they wouldn't cover pandemics anyway, they're not going to provide a defense to a director or association in a pandemic-related claim, even under a D&O policy. So, so we haven't, you know, we've seen the accusations flying, but we haven't actually seen something materialize into a lawsuit and a complaint. We expect it to happen. So associations have to, and their boards have to be extremely careful, and it's hard because your members are, you know, the pool is the big thing. Your members want to get back in the pool, and very often they don't understand those legal complexities, and you really have to communicate it well to the membership and let them understand this is not a normal, you know, we have a swimming pool, and if somebody, you know, heaven forbid, trips and falls, has an accident in the pool, there's going to be insurance coverage. You know, accidents happen. And the reason you're able to say accidents happen so casually is because you have insurance. With COVID-19, without the insurance, you can't say accidents happen so casually. You have to be much more careful. You know, in those common areas, you want to enforce the social distancing. You want to really consider, you know, a mask policy, a facial covering policy. The fitness centers, gyms, the pool area, all those things are things that should definitely have already been looked at, and if not, should definitely be looked at to make sure you're as COVID safe as you possibly can be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and unfortunately, the associations it's probably not going to be a great thing for them. So our best recommendation is to follow all your county local ordinances with regards to the COVID, social distancing, masks, and, you know, for the most part, more than likely keep the pools closed, or you know, hire the right folks to come out and make sure that you know, you have to monitor them here in Palm Beach County. You have to monitor them, make sure everybody's doing the social distancing, and the biggest thing is the bathrooms. Because if you have the pool open, you have to have the bathrooms open, and the bathrooms have to be cleaned frequently throughout the day, not just once a day, frequently throughout the day. One of the things that I think in my lawyer mind when I think about these things is, like, an accident can happen and you would have insurance and people are doing the social distancing, right? But what happens if there is an accident? Everybody's, well, you know, it's probably human nature to run over to try to help that person. And what happens if then that person ends up being diagnosed that they had COVID, or they're asymptomatic, and then the people that ran over to help them caught it. So all of this happened at the pool, at the community pool. Now guess what? Lawsuit against the association. So those types of things, and no coverage, right? Coverage for the accident, not coverage for the COVID. You know, those types of things are things that I, as an attorney, with my attorney hat on, think about.
And the last thing I'll say about your question, John, is we're starting to get some people who are really thinking this through, and I admit it caught me off guard the first time I heard this follow-up question was, well, don't they have to prove it? Don't they have to prove that they got coronavirus, from the pool or from the clubhouse or whatever? And I've given that some thought, and really most of these claims, just like a lot of claims, they never reach the trial stage. They get worked out because people start weighing the risks of losing and winning at trial, how much they would end up paying, how much they're paying for attorney's fees. The problem here is that if somebody was at the pool, for instance, and also contracted coronavirus, there may be no connection whatsoever. But if they come to their lawyer and they say, I got coronavirus, I know it has to be at the pool, I was there, I was doing everything right, but the association wasn't enforcing anything, the lawyer would be in a perfectly ethically sound position to file a lawsuit on that information to seek damages for their client. And the damages could be X. The attorney's fees to litigate it are going to be X. Now go back and remember, there's probably no coverage here and no defense costs that are going to be covered by your D&O policy. So you may be in a situation where somebody brings a claim for, $25,000 or $30,000, and they're full of it, for lack of a better non-legal term. But it's going to cost you 15, 20, maybe 20, maybe more to defend that lawsuit. And you get to the end and they couldn't prove their case. You won. Well, the person who brought the claim, their attorney's on a contingency. So that person probably doesn't lose out. They're suing on a personal injury theory. And so there may not be attorney's fees at issue. So you could win that claim after spending $20,000 or $30,000 to litigate it, when you could have paid the claim to begin with. And I'm not saying that you should pay those claims. What I'm saying is those are the decisions you're going to have to make. And you make yourself a target if it becomes known that you weren't taking any of the precautions that the CDC or that your local authorities provide for you. You weren't supervising the pool. So you want to make yourself kind of a hardened target. In other words, you want to make it so that when the lawyer evaluates this and they're asking their client these questions, well, was there anybody supervising at the pool? Yeah, they hired somebody to come in and make sure they were social distancing. Did they ever shut down the pool because people weren't following the rules? Yeah, they did shut down the pool. Well, as a lawyer, from the coronavirus quote unquote victim side, this is not an attractive case to me, and I'm going to move on to a different association. So I know it's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's really what you're trying to avoid. You're trying to avoid being that target for the easy lawsuits that people are just going to want to settle and make go away.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, I agree. And I know we were using the pool as our reference there. We just got another regarding a cafe, server who contracts it, that sort of thing. So we don't need to respond to that, but I do have some others.
Sure.
Looking back at the DBPR, what is their role in controlling and ensuring rule enforcement over HOAs?
They don't.
The DBPR has very little authority when it comes to homeowner associations. They have a lot of authority with condominium associations, but with homeowner associations, for the most part, it's the elections. And so if you read the statute, when the legislature starts talking about election disputes and how to handle them and recall disputes, then it lays out some rules, and then it says, and then everybody's going to go to DBPR. So really, that's the only thing currently that DBPR governs HOAs with are election and recall disputes.
Okay. So if let's just say that there's another dispute that occurs, is there another, Florida agency that could be called upon?
The courts.
Okay. Awesome. Hopefully that answers that question. And then this would be the last one that I've got. Again, we do have the Q&A section down at the bottom. So if anybody has anything I think we're running out of time, but we might have a couple more minutes. Who is responsible for providing a copy of the bylaws, and should a rider be signed by a new homeowner advising them of the rules, and what happens if that homeowner doesn't abide by those rules?
If the homeowner doesn't abide by the rules, then the association can enforce the rules, and they should enforce the rules. And they do that by several ways, and it's always a process. You can go forward and you violate them, you give them an opportunity to cure. If the association has the authority within their governing documents to fine, and you have a fining committee, there's a whole process for that. That's another 30-minute discussion in among itself. In the very end, let's go all the way. There is a requirement. There's homeowners association, okay? Then the pre-suit mediation. There is a letter that goes out and says, these are the violations, and we're giving you this amount of opportunity to cure them, and if not, you can also opt to do this pre-suit mediation. Gives them 20 days to respond to that and to pick a mediator that's provided to them. And if they don't opt to do pre-suit mediation, then the lawsuit can be filed for injunctive relief. The lawsuit for injunctive relief can be filed if the unit owner does not respond to that pre-suit mediation, or if it doesn't resolve at the mediation. If they do go ahead and opt for it, but it's not, there's no resolution. The injunctive relief at the end, and again, this is all a whole process, and I'm just giving you these bullet points, okay, is at the very end, the injunctive relief is asking a court to issue an order directing the unit owner to follow the governing documents, to do whatever it is they're supposed to do, or stop doing whatever it is that they're doing that they're not supposed to be doing. And if the unit owner fails to comply with a court's order, then you can take them back to, it's still in the same case, but you take them back, and it is because you are violating the court order, you're in contempt of court, you can actually have that person, and this is very far and few between, but you can actually have that person thrown in jail for contempt of court. You ask the court for that relief. That rarely happens, but that is the process. You have more to say about that? I mean, that's in a nutshell, but again, it's a lengthy process, and those are just the bullet points.
Right. And
Can I interject something?
sure.
On that note, this came up many times about new communities wanting to come on board at GRS, and I'm sure it comes up with a lot of other management companies, but the new boards take over. They want to start enforcing the violations. They've never done it before, the previous boards, and they're trying to, excuse me, not get sued because of being selective and so on. So isn't it true that they can declare what they call a new day, set up the violations committee and say, going forward in the next 30 days, we're going to start implementing this. So in other words, they're kind of forgiving the previous things, but starting going forward, they're going to have the new day declaration, and then the violations committee is going to start, enforcing things properly. Isn't that a better remedy to keep the community harmonious than singling out maybe one situation? And this way, it's not selective.
Well, but yes, that is a way if boards have not been enforcing their governing documents. Absolutely, that's a way to deal with it if boards have not been enforcing it. But a lot of communities do enforce, and at any given time, I have 3 or 4 floating around for this pre-suit mediation, because the unit owners just don't want to comply sometimes. But if it is an established community or and things have not been enforced, that they have to provide notification to the unit owners at least 14 days in advance of the meeting at which the board is going to discuss and as you call it a new day, I say that they're going to ratify their governing documents and their rules and regulations, and you know, kind of draw a line in the sand and say this is the day, and we're gonna, you know, after this. But they have to give the association membership notice of the meeting at which they're going to make that decision. What else we got?
That was it.
That's it.
That was all of our questions.
Oh,
So
well, that's great. Then we're
Almost
ending
down to
right
the
around
minute.
on time.
right on time.
And again, we want to thank you guys for helping set this up, and thank all the participants that attended today. I do want to say, and then of course Larry's going to probably jump in too, that we will be providing the folks that attended a certificate. You just give us a day or two, because we have to get the information of who attended, and then we send those out, and we will send you, in addition to the certificate, a copy of the what do you call this thing?
Slideshow.
A slideshow that we have created. It'll be in a PDF form of whether you're a condominium association or it's a homeowner association. So if we have that information, we'll provide the correct slideshow PDF for you. And thanks again.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
That's
so
all I
much.
got. Thank you everybody who attended. Again, great that you're doing that, because that's not just a legal requirement, but it's the right thing to do to stay informed and get as much information you can to carry out your job. And then again, John and Peggy, thank you, so much for putting this together. Really appreciate it.
We do.
You're
And
welcome.
please be safe out there.
Yes.
We will
Stay
do our
healthy.
best, I'm sure. And thank you, Larry and Claire. Appreciate it. Peggy, fantastic seeing you. And everyone have a wonderful Wednesday.
Okay.
All right, you too.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Take care, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.
Bye.
Good class. Thank you.